We did have an Ofsted visit about 2 weeks ago, which I found actually really enjoyable. We are, I think everyone that works at my school would agree, we are actually much better than requires improvement. We do so much for our community, and I'm really proud to work at Woodlands. We do have an intake with some very high levels of deprivation. It's about 70%, I would say, of our pupils are deprived, or what we would call pupil premium, perhaps, and those that aren't perhaps might be or should be. The engagement with our remote learning in January was not as brilliant as we would like it to be, for many reasons. Generally speaking, not because pupils didn't want to be engaged, but there were obstacles in their way, and so we find ourselves now back in school. Well, actually I'm not in school because my youngest son is awaiting a COVID test results, so I've been back on the looms for my classes today, and I've been at home, which is really frustrating. So it looks like another day at home tomorrow because I've not had the results yet. So I'm just going to talk you through then our approach. So I thought long and hard about what we were going to do as a department when we had our year 11s back. We have a very small cohort. I think it's 98 pupils in year 11, but something that I was really firm on when talking with my second in department, he's excellent, and with my amazing team and my line manager, is that I really wanted us to hold the line. We don't quite know what that is at the moment. We don't know what we're going to be assessing them on yet. But something that I really wanted to think about was the phrase that Caroline Hamer said, oh, she's Spalding now actually. Caroline Spalding said a long time ago, "You're in English now." And that's something that has stayed with me for many years now. And it's 2 things that I really wanted to think about. The first was that we need to re-engage our pupils in their education. And that, for me, did not mean feverishly preparing them for assessments that we still don't know the shape of. Kaylee and I have had many conversations over what the shape of GCSE is going to be this year. And the fact is, we still don't know. We can speculate, and we quite frequently do, with a glass of gin on a Friday night, over what it's going to look like, but we don't know. And so we just need to re-engage them in their education. The learning still happens, and we need to be the calm in the storm. For many pupils in my context, and probably in your context as well, they won't have had the easiest of lockdowns the first time around, let alone the third time around. I think we all found it much tougher this time around. And so I put together a booklet which I have shared on Twitter, and I will share with anyone who would like it. I put together this booklet entitled "Powerful Writing for Important Issues," and I very specifically made a decision that we were not going to talk about catching up. We were not going to use the language of GCSE paper 1 question 2. This is what you need to be doing. This is an 8-mark question. What we did instead is we took a step back and we wrote a message in the front of the booklet, which you can see there. We acknowledged, first of all, that it was tough, but we made really clear, and so English had the first lesson that year 11 had back in. They didn't have a tutor time, they went straight into double English. And I felt quite privileged actually that we got to have that time with them, because we were able as a department to really put across the same message. We acknowledged it was tough. What's past is not prologue. It's all still to play for. It doesn't matter, is what we said, that you didn't do any work in the lockdown, if that was the case. And for many people, it was the case for whatever reason. But actually, we can't say, well, you're a failure, you're written off. That's not providing an equitable education for them. We've got these months left, and we have to spend it wisely. We've very clearly held the line. We don't have information on how assessment will work. When we know, you'll know, and we've all given that message very clearly. And I will say, when I look at my previous school, I imagine working there, which is a completely different context. I would imagine that by now I'd been deluged with parents requesting information about this, that and the other, and it's the opposite in this school, which is why as well I sort of banned the phrase catching up, because they don't need to catch up, they just need to catch their breath. although really it is actually linked to paper 2 section B. We're just not telling them that, because that's for us to know. That's for us, not for them. And that was my message to the teachers of year 11 as well. This is your booklet, this is what we're going to be doing, but the way that you're going to approach that is different to the way that I'm going to approach it. By Easter, we're going to look at these 3 big issues. We're going to look at mental health in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to look at the climate crisis, and we're going to look at my favourite, can't wait to see this one, difficult women, question mark. I did put this together actually before the events of this week, but I think it's going to actually be even more interesting to look at that now. And it does link to paper 2 question 5, not specifically because I think that's what we need to work on, it is, but I actually think of the GCSE, what's going to be most useful for them to be looking at the moment, actually it's going to be engaging with the big issues that affect them. So I'm just going to talk you through the 3 topics. What I did was I put together a kind of an overview page, which you can see I've screenshot here. So young people and mental health, climate crisis and difficult women. And this is essentially kind of a hook page. Now, I'm not really a person that does that kind of thing, but in the wake of pandemic, I really feel that this is something we needed to look at. So what I did is I put together 3 different articles of high quality non-fiction, and I just cut them into a booklet essentially. And as I've said, I'm happy to share that. Essentially, I just want people to, or I wanted our teachers and our pupils to just read through these and really kind of discuss and think about them and engage with these issues. We've just finished the mental health one this week, and I set on Loom today the task for them to write me an article on a question that I'm going to show you in a second. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they've actually written. Obviously, in my head, I am going to be looking at it from the perspective of, could I use this as evidence? What mark would I give this out of 40? But I'm not going to tell them that. That's not what they need to be hearing at the moment, that they need this mark out of 40, or they need to use more fronted adverbials, or they need to use a single sentence paragraph. That's not the purpose of this at the moment. So is it a reading scheme or a writing scheme? Well, it's both, actually. It's about providing high quality, high challenge texts to read, to discuss, to engage with, and to use these then as a springboard to writing. Will all classes produce writing at the same level? Absolutely not, no. But will they all engage on the level that's right for them? Yes, they will. So these are the 3 mental health articles that I looked at. So this one, has the pandemic really caused a tsunami of mental health problems? It's I teach tops at year 11, and some of my girls were absolutely furious at some of the things that were said in this, because they just really engaged with it, and it just kind of warmed my cockles really. The second one was an article written by an 18-year-old girl about how she set boundaries in her relationships. I got that from the Young Minds website. And the third one was interesting, by Jill Greengoss, who is professor of psychology at Aberystwyth. Is it okay to laugh during a pandemic? So we spent some time really reading those and pulling them apart. This is the way that I set a writing question with this article, how I learned to set boundaries with a friend for my mental health. So my route through was this: we read, we discussed, we responded, we recapped the Aristotelian triad and how Rachel, 18, has employed it. We verbally discussed the specific examples, the way that throughout she refers back to her therapist's advice. We did all of this verbally. We have a couple of pupils in that group who use the mini whiteboards, and they record their ideas on that. But this was about creating that buzz and that chatter. And something that I've really noted in school this week is that people have said how quiet their classes seem to be. And I don't know if I'm pleased or if it says something about the levels of my behaviour management, but my class, I kind of had to at one point say, okay guys, I know that you're talking through masks, but stop, you need to come back to me. But it was lovely to have that buzz. It was great to actually have that. And then I posed this question: friendship, a blessing or a curse? But I actually tasked them to write more about the one they disagreed with, which again led to a lot of discussion. And we harnessed that and we fostered that really into a question that they're going to be, well, I'm going to be looking at hopefully tomorrow if I get my COVID negative, I get the green light to go back in. But something that I have really kind of come back to post-pandemic is the good old structure strip. Now, I don't know who came up with this. I got it from Twitter years and years ago, but re-engaging with the writing, okay, for many of the pupils that I teach, they have not written more than probably a few words or a few lines since mid-December. The humble structure strip to me is not something I would usually consider at this point in year 11, but we're not playing by that rule anymore. So by using that, it provides a framework, a tangible but realistic amount of writing. These prompts for each section mean that they're actually going to get to grips with what it is they're going to say. And I'm hoping it's going to lead to a sense of achievement. I spoke to, on email, the cover supervisor that did my lessons today, played my loom and then set them off onto writing. You know, seemed to feel that that had gone well and that they'd all engaged with that. And, you know, for me at the moment, this is the stage that my cohort are at. So what is my key message here? Well, until we know a little bit more, and I'm told that that's going to be the 31st of March, we really need to hold the line. The three things that I am thinking about at the moment are retrieval of the work that we've already done, building that confidence back up, because for so many of our pupils, that has been knocked really badly, and actually promoting enjoyment. So many pupils have not really had a lot of fun in lockdown, and I'm not saying it was all going to be kind of all bells and whistles and it's fun in our lessons, but actually a sense of enjoyment doesn't have to be that. It can come from a sense of satisfaction, from that kind of righteous anger that you feel when you are trying to argue your point, and that's really what I'm trying to foster. So I'm happy to share that booklet with anyone who would like it. Perhaps Kaylee will put it onto her blog, but that is really my journey back with our year 11. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you so much, Laura. Yes, couldn't agree more. We are telling our students that we're using things for evidence, but just because from student voice, we've learned that they want that clarity. So again, it's about application to context, isn't it? Laura, I can't see you. You seem to have disappeared.
Oh, no, I'm here still. I'm here.
Can't see your face. Never mind. I can imagine it's fine. So just a few questions then, whilst we just move on to our next speaker. When you said, you know, you don't want to tell the students that it's an assessment and you don't want to, you know, use that language of this is what we're using for evidence, how do you, to a year 11 cohort who in 3 months' time don't see themselves being in school of any sort, or, you know, they want to go into a job, how do you make that purposeful for them?
How do I make that,
purposeful, sorry.
How do I make it purposeful for them? Well, I think because of the way that I've said, okay, we're going to engage with the big issues. What I've tried to do is actually pick things that I think are relevant to them. Now, I am not a person that picks something based upon its relevancy. I pick texts based on you know, the power that they have, or the importance that they hold in the canon. But I think for the cohort that we have, and I think it's really vital that I stress that our cohort are a little bit different to many other people's. I think it's really important that we make it relevant at this point, and hearing them engaging with each other in the lessons that we've had so far has been proof that they are engaging with that. And am I using any specific strategies to keep people with literature checks? Yeah, so we have retrieval activities at the start of every lesson and built in throughout our lessons. I haven't talked about those in here because I think that's a different thing to be talking about, but yeah, we do have retrieval activities all the time, and our homeworks are also retrieval. So that's kind of keeping going, but again, until we know more, I'm not going to be pushing something that I think is going to switch our pupils off. That's right for them at this time. Another one in the chat.
I think often, I mean, I talked about it in my assessment for Key Stage 3. We do, like you say, turn students off in terms of our exam talk, and I like that you're harnessing the opportunity to, instead of this being about the end point of exams, actually it's about them as people and using language as power, because I think that's, I mean, it's more pertinent now than I think that it's ever been. So thank you so much for that, Laura. Really appreciate the time. I am sharing, if the speakers are happy for me to share their resources, I will be sharing those on a page on my blog, with obviously with credit to those people. So please don't worry about that. Don't worry about sort of you don't need to DM or tweet anybody if needs be. It saves you the job of just click a link on HoDandHeart and I'll send that round post-event as well. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce the wonderful Jade Hickin, who I am delighted to call one of my very, very best friends. and also an esteemed colleague and somebody who I go to for advice regularly, who, if there's anything to do with initial teacher training, I'm like, hello, Jade, paging Jade, I need your help. Thank you, Jade. Jade has been teaching in Lincolnshire for 12 years and is also a senior examiner for literature. She is a trust-wide lead practitioner for English at a large multi-academy trust, but she's also a whole school lead practitioner for teaching and learning in one of the trust schools. She is extremely passionate about the power of knowledge-rich curriculum, the warm, strict behaviour system and explicit instruction, and how they can transform lives of our scholars and our teachers. She's in her role at school, she is the ITT coordinator and leads on early career teaching, mentoring and coaching. She's become increasingly engaged with instructional coaching as a powerful method of making rapid development for all teachers. Today, she's going to speak to us about how lockdown teaching forced her to adapt this coaching model and what she learned from that. And she also wears fabulous shoes and fabulous dresses, and she's all of it to boot. So handing over to Jade, the glamorous one of us all, and she's going to talk to us all about instructional coaching, and I'm going to learn loads from this. So thank you, Jade.
Can you see my screen?
I can.
Excellent. Hello. Hi, I'm Jade Hickin. And as Katie said, I'm a trust-wide lead practitioner for English, and I'm a whole school lead practitioner for teaching and learning. And so as part of my teaching and learning role, I coach teachers. And that is the main thing that I'm going to talk to you about today. So it's about instructional coaching remotely, what we can learn from the challenges that has made me face, and hopefully how we can use those challenges and the things that I have learned from those to help us with transitioning back into school teaching. So first of all, it's important that we establish what instructional coaching actually is and how it works. So often when we hear the word coaching, we imagine somebody who is kind of a guide who asks us questions, and through that gentle process, we are coaxed into finding our own solutions. Instructional coaching isn't like that. It's very different. Instructional coaching is probably more aligned to the connotations that you might have from a sports coach, or if you think around the connotations of the adjective instructional. So if you think about that root instruct, it's more telling people what to do rather than guiding through questioning. So this coaching model is very much expert led. So you're being led by an expert who develops that teacher that they are coaching, and they do so by, as the expert, diagnosing very precise, granular steps that the teacher needs to improve upon, and they do that through very short, frequent observations, which are then followed by coaching feedback sessions in which they model excellent practice as an example for the teacher, and then they get the teacher to engage in deliberate practice. And the 3 Ds are how I sort of remember those core principles of instructional coaching. So there's the developmental and not judgmental, there's the diagnostic for the action steps, and there's the deliberate for the deliberate practice. So, there we go. So this cycle that we have here of observation, and then setting the action steps, and then this coaching session, which includes the example, the modelling and the deliberate practice. This then will continue in this circle to have continuous improvement, and teachers will stay on the same action step until the coach is confident that they have definitely mastered it and are ready to move on to the next one. So during the first term of this academic year, so up till Christmas, I was using the Ambitions Institute ECT framework for the coaching of my NQTs, who are the main people that I have been coaching so far this year. And this is a really fantastic tool, and I thoroughly recommend it. There's also the Paul Bambrick-Santoyo methods, which include there's in Leverage Leadership and in Get Better Faster. Both of these have really good guides in there as well, and they have different strands to them. So in the Ambitions Institute, you've got the behaviour strand, which comes first, and then the Leverage Leadership one would call that management. So that's more about your classroom culture and things. And then you've also got the instruction strand for Ambitions Institute, and this would be called Rigor in the Paul Bambrick-Santoyo one. So we started out with the one that's about behaviour and management, so all about classroom culture. And all of the action steps that we were using, therefore, and focusing our improvements on were all about cementing those clear, coherent classroom routines so that we could create that perfect learning environment. Feedback sessions really focused on me standing up and performing my pantomime of how I start my lessons, how I use the Brighton lines technique to start off an activity, and how I use non-verbal cues to ensure compliance and things like that. And then we would swap over for the deliberate practice, and I would take on the role of the scholars, and the teacher would do their practice of that whilst I pretended to be the class. And to be honest, I thought that I would really hate doing that because I thought it'd be like really cringeworthy. But actually it was great. It was really, really good. And mainly because we were seeing such fantastic incremental improvements each week, and the effect on the learning was so clear, and it's just so rewarding to see that and to know that you're having that impact. But then along came lockdown 3, the rubbish sequel, and obviously that changed everything for all of us. And that focus that we had on behaviour was one of the main things that needed to change, because with online teaching, behaviour and routines were completely different. So action steps that focused on classroom culture and behaviour, they weren't really the most effective things to be working on at that time. So luckily the Ambitions programme actually reflected that and moved on to the different strand at that time, focusing on instruction, which in the Bambrick-Santoyo would be the rigor if you were looking at that one. So this is much more focused on learning how to structure and then deliver effective lessons and sequences of lessons. So this is much more useful in terms of an area for a remote coach. Classroom routines will be very different in the online classroom, but the knowledge and structuring of knowledge and how we sequence the component parts of our curriculum, they are enduring foundations which every teacher needs to master in order to move along their journey towards expertise. So this has given me my first learning point, which I am linking to this idea of instructional coaching being developmental and not judgmental. So really focusing in on that idea of development. So we need to think about fitting our focus to the context. What is going to be both useful right now, but also what is going to have a long-term impact on your teacher and therefore on the learners as well. So another challenge that faced me with remote coaching was observation. Observing is really, really important as part of instructional coaching, but observation in instructional coaching is not like the observations of old that I used to experience, and I'm sure many of you have, where you would pick out your best class at the very start of the year, and then you'd roll out your favourite tried and tested show lesson so that you'd get your usual grading of good with outstanding features, which you always seem to get, which, let's face it, was a wholly pointless activity. So with instructional coaching, remember that it's not going to be graded because it's not about judgment, it's developmental and not judgmental. So the coach drops in regularly in more of a learning walk style, and they don't stay for the whole lesson. So they're staying only until they have seen that one thing, that highest leverage point that they need to improve for that week. And as I said, no grading, because it is just developmental and not judgmental. So there isn't that same level of pressure that you need to bring out some kind of show lesson to prove that you're worth being a teacher. So clearly the observing for remote teaching and remote coaching needed adjusting to. And dropping into live lessons online isn't always effective. Technical problems, lessons where the scholars have been sent off to do some independent work, just access to getting into things online, I'm sure we've all experienced, they've all scuppered my intentions at some point to try and drop in on a lesson in order to observe. So this actually brought out a really positive outcome though, and their use of pre-recorded lessons. So these obviously aren't perfect for perfecting our teaching in classroom practice, because they are obviously so far removed from the classroom environment, but they do provide a lot of benefits. So for example, they mean that they can be viewed at any time, so you can fit them around your day very easily, and that also helps in that you can sample a much wider range of lessons, rather than, I mean, I've had situations where there is only one lesson that I can get to because that's the lesson where I happen to be free, and that teacher is teaching at that time. So it means that you can see them with different groups and see if those action steps are being embedded in different contexts. So that's extremely useful. And also you can do things like you can pause and you can rewind and really consider how to improve that moment, and you can really focus in on the content and the structure and the quality of the explanations and things like that. So this brings me on to my second learning point, which I'm linking to this idea of instructional coaching being diagnostic. And so that is that videos are a really powerful tool for coaches and teachers to diagnose these action steps that are needed to improve practice. And this is also something that we can continue in our real life classroom and our real life coaching in order to continue with some of these benefits. And many of these benefits also will then continue over into the coaching session itself, because it means that we can analyze a moment together. So it acts as like a third object, and it's kind of less intimidating because you're sitting next to each other rather than opposite. You're looking at something together. It kind of depersonalizes it in a way. So you can analyze that moment together and really exemplify and see together the thing that needs to be improved. And it makes it more real, I think, and it's not just you saying it. They can see it for themselves. So I think that's going to be extremely powerful. So modelling is such an important part of the instructional coaching model. So when we made that shift to the instructional rigor strand from the behaviour one, I found it quite strange at first, because there was less for me when I was modelling to show from my delivery in the classroom. So there needed to be a kind of shift from what we would call performance modelling, so that whole sort of pantomime of me play acting as the teacher, and showing what I would do, so me standing up pretending to start off an activity or whatever it was, to what we call product modelling. So it's more about looking at the resources and the plans and the planning and structuring of the lesson. So again, actually, the pre-recorded lessons were very useful here. So in feedback sessions, we could look through one of my lessons as a model and really pick it apart, and really make that gap clear between the expert practice and the more novice practice, and see the difference there. And another powerful tool, which I learned from a colleague, was the live modelling of planning. So remotely, this would be sharing the screen and then doing the planning, but narrating the thinking process, just like you would if you were modelling in the classroom. So you as the coach, modelling as the expert, planning how to instruct that lesson, focusing on the action point that you've given, and then you can use faded guidance as the coach for the teacher, helping them to become more independent with their planning, with focus on the action step as you guide them to do that deliberate practice. So this is my third learning point, focus on this idea of it being deliberate. And the learning point is that modelling isn't just about performing in the classroom. Teachers need to see and hear how expert teachers think and plan, so that they can understand the mental models that we have and draw upon in order to be good teachers. And then they need to deliberately practice this so that they can start to create those same mental models for themselves. Finally, I want to talk a little bit more detail about the transition back into teaching in school, with actual human beings in front of us, and what this is going to mean for instructional coaching. So for me, I'm finding that there's going to need to be flexibility. And I think this is what I have learned from when we moved into the lockdown situation, and the situation changed so much that time. And I think I'm really applying that first learning point here of thinking, well, what is the right focus for my context and for my teacher's context, because I'm coaching more than one teacher. So I'm thinking about what is useful for them now and for their long-term impact on their teaching and for the scholars. So, for example, I might have one teacher who is back in the building, and for this teacher, that focus very much needs to be back on the classroom culture. So things are different. There are new challenges in terms of behaviour, I think, such as wearing masks, and there are new routines that we need to adhere to keep people safe. And that means that it's even more important that we need to remember and to rehearse and retain the rules and the routines, which are the structure that are upholding the learning and belonging in our classrooms. So in order to do that, I'm going to be going right back to the starts of lessons, right back to those first points about establishing the fundamentals of classroom culture, and deliberately practicing the mastery of each step from there in driving that calm, focused learning environment for those teachers. On the other hand, we might have another teacher who is at home and shielding, and they may be teaching through a video link, whilst there's another colleague who is focusing on the classroom environment and dealing with that end of things. So this teacher needs a completely different focus. So for them, it's going to be much more useful for them to continue with the instruction strands, so that their lessons are increasingly focused, that they're carefully structured, so that they are thinking about building the scholar's schemata of knowledge. So I will be combining both the drop-ins to actually see what's going on, but also using that technology, since if they're teaching over a video link, they're able to record still, so that I can draw on those benefits that I discovered during lockdown learning, and so that we can maximise our time together. So I hope that this talk has been useful for anyone who is maybe considering using instructional coaching, but was unsure about how it would work in the varied circumstances that we're facing, or maybe who has been using instructional coaching and had no idea about how to adapt it, or is struggling with that, or even if you had no idea about instructional coaching and now you've learned a little bit more about it. I have done a longer presentation just about what instructional coaching is for BrewEd Clee back in January, so I can tweet that link out because it is on YouTube if you wanted to find out any more about it. But to finish off, I just want to summarise by saying that your coaching for instructional coaching always needs to remain developmental and not judgmental. And that means that you need to choose the right focus for your context. So think what will be useful right now and also have a long-term impact. It needs to remain diagnostic. So think about how videos can be a powerful tool for coaches and teachers to diagnose the action steps needed to improve practice. And it needs to remain deliberate. So teachers not only need to see how you perform in the classroom, but teachers need to see and hear how expert teachers think and plan and deliberately practice that as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hayley.
Just a few questions for you, Jim. A few questions in the do your teachers respond differently depending on their level of experience to this method?
I don't know if it's about level of expertise, or if it's about how open-minded you are, about ready for change. I think one of the things that I haven't talked about particularly in this is the first part of the coaching. There needs to be a learning experience first, where you outline what good looks like, what you're aiming to achieve by the end of it. So all of the instructional coaching that I do, because of the institutions that I work for, we use very clear, precise things that we use explicit instruction. So I'm going to be coaching people to use explicit instruction, so they need to understand that's what we're doing, and so that is outlined very clearly at the start. And we use knowledge rich in terms of our curriculum instruction, things like that, and what we choose to put in our curriculum content. So there needs to be that at the beginning, so that you've got that shared understanding. That shared understanding is very important, I think, and that makes the engagement a lot better, because you both understand what you're aiming for, and you both then got that shared language as well, that commonality of language that makes it much more effective and efficient.
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar from when we're modelling for the students. If we put it into context as to why we're doing it and they understand it more, they engage better, don't they?
Exactly.
A really interesting question here. When I think of coaching, I think of, I used to hate being coached. And if there's anyone in here, or Lindsay's in here, I just like being given the answer. So I would love, if I was an NQT, I would love instructional coaching, because I just want to be shown how to do it. What do I do? What does a good one look like? And I think I spent 2 years being coached and just wanting to tear my hair out, because I was constantly being guided. And I'm very much a black and white person. So when you say coaching, now you and I have talked about this, so I understand what this is, but when you first said to me, I'm doing instructional coaching, I was like, oh God, I hate coaching. But how do you get around that sort of, that obstacle of what people perceive coaching to be? Because it's so much different, isn't it? And I know you say it links to the sports coaching, and that analogy makes complete sense, but when it comes to teachers who have been thrown the coaching sort of ball, and it's very much a, let me guide you this way, which way do you want to go? I know which answer you want, but it was like Mystic Meg, wasn't it? It's like, I don't know. So how do you move away from that sort of connotation?
I think it's probably more experienced teachers who perhaps have that impression. And I am going to be coaching more experienced teachers as well. And I think I've listened to Dr. Lorraine Hammond is a really good person to listen to about and read as well. She's done some really good journals on this and some really good podcasts. And she talks about this as well. So it's about engaging some really vocal people who are very enthusiastic about it within the school, and then them sharing that journey and how much improvement they're making, and then that can build the momentum towards it. I think that is a good thing, because then if people understand and can hear about it from people who are actually doing it and see what the results are, then that is really effective. And also things like deliberate practice. I mean, we've at school done, you know, whole school deliberate practice sessions and things like that sort of thing. So, you know, this is the sort of thing you'd be doing, but just on a one-on-one basis. So we were brought in Brighton Lines, for example, as a whole school focus in September, and we started off, you know, by doing a whole school, all of the teachers doing deliberate practice of that in the hall together.
Lovely, thank you, Jade. That was, I've learnt loads from that. So, and I'm anyone says the word coaching to me and I'm like, but yes, thank you, really enjoyed that. Right, okay, running order. I'm still aghast about the Zoom bomb. And I did post a link to Zoom on Twitter, but that person had been in since the start, and it's somebody that engages me on Twitter, so I don't know if I'm being catfished. I've been watching The Circle. Right, okay, so we now have the person who I mentioned at the start, who we've got to thank for this session actually taking place. We have got Damon Hesford, who's going to present to us the mother of invention, how lockdown made us all better teachers. So Damon is an English teacher from Bolton in his 11th year of teaching, and he is subject mentor for trainees in his English department. He's lucky to work with an incredible team and a great head of department at Sharples, who offer him support. Tell him when he missed, sorry, I'm clearly reading his bio, aren't I? Tell him when he's missed a deadline, or if he's going to miss one, and then give him a chance to try things out and see how they go. So like really supportive network you've got there, Damon. So take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You were not wrong to that with that kind of Freudian slip. They usually do tell me that I have missed a deadline, not that I'm about to miss one. Like it's normally you missed that. Where's your data? So yeah, hopefully you can see my screen on there. You've got my presentation, and that just, you know, my socials, a little bit about me. Dead straightforward. I think it's really important that I share with you, like straight away, teacher of English, but that is what I am, just a teacher. And I don't mean that kind of to, you know, discredit. I think it's really important that what I'll talk about towards the end, I am just a teacher with his 20 odd lessons a week, and these are things that I've tried in my classroom and that work in my classroom, and they're linked to what I've done for the past 12 months remotely. Okay, so let me just sort this out. So my apologies. So there we go. So the group there first, pretty much with everything, and the necessity is the mother of invention, comes from Plato. Our need will be the real creator. And I think that was hammered home to us in March of last year. I mean, you know, it's coming up to the 12-month anniversary of our first online remote session. And in March last year, everything was gone. Our classrooms, our carefully cultivated and colour-coded seating plans with all that data on, our schemes of work, everything that we had was gone. And all that was left was you, your class, a laptop, and the need for us to teach and for the students to learn. That was all that we had. And so we needed to become inventive, we needed to become innovative. And obviously I think some of it we'll probably look to get rid of. You know, I don't think we'll have students just walking in and out of lessons and Virgin Media for some reason get lame. You know, I like to think we'll return to accurate punctuation and that students won't just yell at us in caps for an entire lesson. You know, I don't know about this, but the idea of pets interrupting our lessons does seem quite appealing. I might be willing to keep that. And the idea of teachers being allowed to wear shorts, that's mainly just my campaign. And I don't think my head of department or my head teacher's in yet, but watch this video, I'm just going to plug away for it again. But I think, you know, it's dead tempting to look at lockdown as a really kind of, you know, draining experience, talking to a camera, seeing loads of initials. It is a little bit draining in some elements, but I think there's some elements of that remote learning experience that we need to keep. And I think we need to put into our real classrooms now that they're back in school, and you kind of got 2 weeks till Easter and then the summer term to kind of play with a few of the things. And here are a couple of my suggestions. In terms of what the experts have said, the Education Endowment Foundation talks about this in April, and you can see there I've underlined for me the 3 things that I think are most relevant to our classroom. Teaching quality is the most important thing. Peer interaction is something that's critical, and supporting independent learning is something that we need to do. And this was as true online as I think it is in our classroom. So what the EEF found in April of last year, I think those 3 in particular are critical when it comes to what we do in our classrooms. And I think to, you know, suggest otherwise, well, it's what the, you know, core elements of teaching are. Doug Lamont, one of the kind of educational champions, his book came out in September, so it was a kind of few months late. We could have done with it in March. If it had been a little bit Nostradamus about it, it would have been so much more helpful. But Lamont talks about dissolving the screen, and I thought that was a really powerful statement. If you've not read the book, Alex Fairlam, who is an absolute queen on Twitter, search her up, Lampart T, I think it is. She's done a really brilliant summary, because I'd forgotten what was in here. I read it a couple of months ago. I forgot what was in there, so I just consulted her thing. But she's got an excellent summary of this book, just really useful take homes. But, you know, he's given sound advice, but I think the question I would ask is, does it apply the opposite way around? And this slightly rhetorical question I have answered at the bottom there. Yes, I think it does. You know, can we make that classroom experience reflect some of the things that were successful online? Yes, we can. And I think, yes, we should. Okay, so I'm going to try and outline a few elements now. These are mine. Okay, so from remote to classroom, these are the things I'm going to look at prioritizing. And you can see them there. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on each one. Okay, there we go. So first thing we're looking at is student engagement, student involvement, student interaction. And this was a task that I think I used it basically to check that the kids weren't on their PlayStations. You know, so I'd set random questions throughout the lesson, and I'd expect every single student to take part. I'd expect every single student to put an answer in the document that I created or an answer in the chat. My question to myself now, coming back in, is how often do I hear from every single student in my classroom? And the answer is rarely. You know, I might ask them a question, how they're doing. I might, you know, get a one-word answer or something from them. But look, remote learning showed me that I had great ideas, great answers, great thoughts from every single student. So what kind of started as a bit of a tool to make sure they weren't on their PlayStations became a really useful way to engage students, get those voices found, and give them that platform to express themselves. You know, and I've put that on the bottom there. This needs to happen. You know, we're not doing some students, most students, not those reliable ones that you know are going to give a really good answer. But every single student, I think, needs to be engaged with and given that platform, because, you know, it's critical we have that. You know, and I've said in terms of engagement, what I'm going to try and do is have more engagement from students, a better quality of engagement, so not just accept those one-word answers. And I'm going to be really clear, because I think, you know, anyone, and I know I've got a couple of colleagues from my department who are in here now, they'll know that sometimes I can be a little bit abstract. But I need to be a little bit more clear with my students so that I can get good engagement, good involvement. you know, one of the successes of lockdown was finding that lovely quiet child who never says anything in your lesson, but they suddenly turn into star of your class. You know, I had a girl in one of my year 8 classes who my trainee is currently working with, and she was a star, and she's come back in today and she's not as good. You know, she's been a little bit detached, she's a little bit quiet. I need to ensure that she stays at the standard she worked at throughout January and February and the first week or so of March, because she showed me she can do it. You know, it gave her that platform. I need to now find a way to make that platform something that can exist for real. Read this little article and I thought it was really useful. Addressing a misconception. Well, if we don't let the students talk and tell us what they think, we don't know the misconception exists. So I think, you know, the more my students talk, the more my students engage, the more my students tell me things and show me answers, the better it's going to be for assessing that finding those misconceptions and addressing those misconceptions. There's a link to that article. I'll share the PowerPoint. It's not just about less of me, okay? Because again, my department will tell you it sometimes is all about me, but it's about giving the students those opportunities to say and do things that without me just going, well, we're pressed for time, so I'll just do it. I think, you know, there's a state of thinking about, let's keep those online channels open. You know, I'll talk about homework in a moment and my ideas about that, but I think keep those online channels open. It's a great way to communicate. It's something the kids are very comfortable with. And then it links really well to time, which is my next topic, okay? So here are some strategies for you. Sorry, cold calling, it's something that's, you know, quite in vogue at the minute. People love that phrase, but giving them some planning time, you know, say, right, you've got 45 seconds, plan your answer, think about your answer, discuss your answer. I could come to any single one of you. Create that culture where students are ready to give an answer and you expect that. Every student answers. This is one of those things I'm trying to make a thing. So I don't know if you want to make this like something you say, but I'm looking at a way to get every single student to contribute like I did. I'm going to try it tomorrow with my year 8 class. You know, I'll post some results online and you can see kind of how well it goes. But I want every single student to answer a question and I'm going to read every single answer out loud to the class. We're going to create that culture of engagement, involvement, accountability, addressing misconceptions, all the things I talked about. Oracy, you know, I think it's all very well and good saying we want students to engage more and talk more and do more, but do they know how to do that? You know, I'm going to expect it of them, high standards in oracy. I'm going to model that for them and provide scaffolds so that they can contribute. They can find that voice that they found when they were typing away into a chat or using a Google Doc or whatever it might be. But my oracy needs to be something that I concentrate on, because these kids, some of them aren't as articulate as we would like them to be. Heaven knows I'm not as articulate as I'd like to be sometimes. I read this on an article yesterday, and it's that idea of metacognitively, like that metacognitive process of goal setting. So giving the students the thing about, right, well, how often do you contribute? You know, I've got year 8 parents evening on Thursday, and I'm going to say to a couple of the kids, like we all probably do, they need to make, you know, they could be a little bit more vocal, they could ask for a little bit more help. But what does that mean? You know, we set them targets for spelling, we set them targets for reading, we set them targets for writing, but do we set them targets for contributing? You know, that's a skill we assume they've got. Maybe we need to scaffold that of going, right, I want you to contribute once a week, and then after half term, it's 2 or 3 times a week. You know, I want them to stand at the front of the class and do a speech, but maybe get them involved in that process of, you know, setting themselves a goal. The article there linked, it's not my idea, it's something I saw last night, but I thought it was really useful for this session. And then bouncing ideas around, it links to collaboration and questioning. I'll talk about that in a second, okay? Second one is time. That silence after the question was painful, and I'm sure we're all aware of that. But was it? Because it created that wait time that you've probably been told about since the first week of your PGCE. You know, stick your hand, right, what's this divided by this? Right, it's 236. The class are like, what? I didn't have time to answer the question, miss. Why did you just yell the answer at me? You know, that wait time is something we've been told about since we were, you know, teachers that were so high, and now we're all experienced. Lockdown forced us to sit there and just go. Anytime you're 11. But that was a good thing, I think, you know, because it's given us that chance to go, right, maybe they need that time. Maybe I don't give them that time in my classroom, you know, because we're racing through content. But is that what we're supposed to be teaching for? Students took the time to think, to write, to proofread. Sometimes proofreading was a step they missed out, clearly, but you know, they took that time to construct something. Teachers, it showed us, I think, what students can do. You know, that thing I shared earlier showed that if I give them the time, they can write something of good quality. So give them that time. And then I think this is critical. You know, I think this is something I talked about with my trainee today. We were just having a quick chat about this session. But you know, if you knew that time you go, right, I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to take 4 minutes for the first person to type something in. So I'm going to be sat here like a fool for 4 minutes. I ask better questions online. You know, teachers, I did a little bit of reading just before this session, ask something, you know, like 200 odd questions a day, like whatever, like some of those questions are no good. So now coming out of lockdown, I'm going to think about that painful experience of sitting silently waiting and go, right, when I knew that was a thing, I took the time to plan good questions so that if I'm sat here looking at a screen and waiting for a chat to start to be filled, it's a valid question. It's a useful question. It's a question that has a purpose and a point rather than just, oh, I'm asking questions for the sake of. So I think really look at our questioning would be a great thing to come out of this experience. Giving students that time and space, I think, is really critical. You know, get them to do something independent. We're so keen on them going, right, let's progress. Let's get them through content. Let's get on to the next thing. Actually, maybe give them that time. I don't think we do. I'm certainly guilty of not giving my students the time they need to do something of quality. And so one of the things I'm going to look to do post-lockdown, I've tried it a couple of times already this week. I'm going to try it again for the rest of the week. My trainees are going to try it tomorrow when I observe them both. But it's that, give them some time to actually answer the question. And it's so critical because independence is a skill we want to foster. We're not just getting them grades, we're giving them skills to answer every question they're asked for the rest of their life, not just the question I've set them now because my observation, you know, someone's observing me at the back. You know, really give them that time to be independent because that's going to last forever. And I think it's important that it's not just about silence. You know, we give them time to think, we give them time to prepare, but we give them time to discuss and explore. And I'll talk about collaboration next, okay? Here's the thing I found for you. So wait time as a concept was invented by this lady called Mary Budd Rowe. And apparently periods of 3 or more seconds lead to positive outcomes. 3 seconds would have been like goals, absolute goals in lockdown. If I'd have asked a question and 3 seconds later I had an answer, I'd be buzzing about that, you know? But giving them that wait time, we don't do it in the room. I think, you know, 1, 2, 3 in a classroom seems like a lifetime for some teachers. They cannot have that. So I think it's something I'm going to look to try and do more of, okay? Because it'll help to sustain those discovered voices and give them that opportunity. Collaboration. Group work's my weakness. I'll be 100% honest. I hate group work. You know, it was massive during my teacher training. The Bono's thinking hats, you know, everyone's got a role to play, all that kind of patter. And it just makes me shiver a little bit now. You can see Kaylee's pulling her face there. And it just, honestly, it's my weakness. I think it's my weakness because I'm terribly disorganized. The idea of photocopying different resources and putting them in different locations and it then working is just not going to happen. And anyone that's seen me teach will know that. But remote learning created collaboration. So rather than going, right, we're going to work in groups, it was right, you are working on something big, something important, something high quality. And that meant they felt part of something. You know, Lemov's book talks about wanting to feel part of something and make the students feel like they are part of a community. And it was critical. You know, we missed our students desperately. So collaborating was something I could do online. You know, I'll show you an example in a minute. But, you know, the idea for me as an English teacher now of doing 30 essays with 30 different essay plans and 30 different students working individually, it's baffling. What we're going to do now is we're going to say, right, you guys are working on this, you guys are working on this, you guys are working on this, and you're going to do it really well. And when you've done it, you've done it, you've done it, we're going to put that all together and we'll have an amazing essay that that we can turn into a brilliant grade 9 piece of work, or we can turn into something truly exceptional. And giving them that responsibility, giving them that sense of community, because that's not stopped. We're still part of something. They're still my class. They're still my children. I want to continue that. I'll show you something I did. Stole this off Twitter, all right, completely. But basically, I gave them a question on masculinity in Romeo and Juliet, and they worked together to build it. And you can see there the names of my students. I gave them, right, you're going to do Act 1, you're going to do Act 2, you're going to do Act 3, and they hammered it. They absolutely just raced through the text and gone, right, we're getting all this out. And it was great. It was so much better than if I'd said, right, you know, you go off and do your essay plan, you go off and do yours, you go off and do yours. Collaboration made that so much better. And it's going to be something I need to do at college and uni, 100%. In my classroom, I'm going to look to do a couple of these elements, you know, make it clear what they're doing, look at peer assessment, look at, you know, we're part of one group rather than a single group. And I've got an example there for PE, you know, giving students a clear sense of like, right, this is a hard task. Let's work together to break the task up. And doing it like that is exactly what I did in lockdown. And I'll do it in my classroom. And we're going to start doing something like that tomorrow with my Year 11s. Assessment and feedback. We didn't do any mid-year assessments and the world continued to spin. So I think that's such an important point to kind of raise to ourselves. You know, we didn't do that data, that tracking, all that thing, but things carried on. And so I think it's a good thing to start saying, well, what's assessment looking like? What do we do? What's its role? Benefits obvious, but the harm I think is also obvious. We talked throughout lockdown, especially the last kind of couple of months, about mental well-being. So let's look at the benefits and the harm, and let's try and strike a balance that means assessment's purposeful. Feedback was much better, I thought, during remote learning, because I could do it immediately. I wasn't waiting a week. I wasn't quarantining books. I want to look at ways to create feedback as a, you know, something that's more immediate in my classroom. You know, whether that's using my visualizer, whether that's students reading stuff out and me providing that immediate verbal feedback. But my feedback needs to be purposeful, because it was immediate during live lessons. It has to be as immediate in the classroom, because that's good for me in terms of marking. It's good for them in terms of making improvements. Okay. So one of the things, a couple of things I've suggested: positive culture around assessment, model that self-assessment process, show them how to do it, give them really clear focuses so that it's purposeful peer assessment and self-assessment. You know, do it yourself. You know, I always write an essay. When my students do it, I do it. And I think it works so well to put myself under the same microscope as them. It removes that fear, you know, that positive culture I talked about. Quick assessments. My head of department's done a few of these for online learning, but 3, 2, 1 and answer, debate, you know, all those type of things. I've said that assessment for the sake of learning rather than for the sake of data. You know, does every assessment have to be a GCSE exam? My head of department's looking at revisiting assessment as a concept, and I'm dead excited to see what she does, because does it have to follow that exam style question, 4 marker, 8 marker, whatever marker you call it? I don't know if it does. And then looking at moving extended responses. Is a good use of my lesson time watching them write an essay for 40 minutes? Could I do something more effective in that time? Could I teach them something and then say, go home, write your essay, put it on the Google document, put it online, whatever? It's just a consideration point. Next 3 elements I'm going to whiz through really quickly. They're less precise and more abstract notions, okay? So homework, this is from the EEF, and it's this idea that, you know, homework needs to link to what we do. It has to link to what we do. And so I think lockdown's taught us what they can do at home. Is it time for us to rethink the concepts of homework? Is it time for us to look at homework and go, right, what is its purpose? You know, what are we doing with it? Do we need it? You know, do we give them that time away for 12 months? I don't know. But I think homework is something that cannot exist in the format it exists in now. I think we've seen what they can do online. We've got all the digital setups in place. We've got the communication channels in place for most of our students. I think it needs to be revisited. I think it's something that's dead exciting that we could do that makes homework really powerful. So a couple of things: revision classes on Google Meet. I know our deputy head's looking at doing revision sessions online now instead of, she used to do them on a Sunday at McDonald's, which was dead exciting for the kids, but she's moving it online, so she doesn't have to go to McDonald's. Homework on one document, none of that, oh, I've lost it, I can't find it, I didn't know what to do. They're not doing it on the bus on the way to school. They do it before, at home, on a document or something like that. Building on your classwork. So like I said, doing an extended response or something like that. Collaborating, getting that sense of community. We're a community in class, we're a community at home. And then options for those without technology, consider photos, homework clubs, paper submission still for some exceptional cases, but looking at variety. Last two now, our CPD. Last March, and this was the day I checked it, Monday, 23rd of March, it was your classes, laptops. No experts, no people like myself going, this is how you do this. No books, no blogs, no articles, no anything. It was just you. And what that forced you to do is be that mother of invention. You were the CPD lead for you. And I think that's so empowering, because I think, you know, we've got a thing in teaching where we don't pat ourselves on the back and celebrate it. You all did incredible things in that 12 months that you were forced to reinvent your entire career. You know, trainees basically learned how to do 2 different styles of teaching for the very first time, all online. And it was insane. It's incredible. And I think what it's got to do is, you are an expert, you are innovative, you are creative. I think you should share it. You know, I am just a teacher, like I said at the start, but I'm here telling you today the things I've done. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this lockdown, remote learning experience. Kaylee mentioned that, be that 10% braver, women ed, you know, it's their kind of motto. I think do it, be more brave, you know, be braver. I'm no more qualified than you are to tell you how to do this. So you should be doing this as well. You know, the next time Kaylee does this, should be 10, 20, 30 people trying. Lastly, and this is a little bit of a kind of, I suppose, more abstract thing. The lady there is the Freedom Writers lady. So the film Freedom Writers, we share a birthday. And yeah, that's about it. But that favourite part of my online lesson was that thanks and that goodbye. It was the students. And I think we get so lost in all the other nonsense, the data, the meetings, the stress, the hassle. But we spent the last 12 months thinking about our students, you know, well-being, learning for the sake of learning, the breadth of reading, the diversity of our curriculum, the importance of community, the value of sport and fitness, how our disadvantaged students are struggling to access, you know, a pen, never mind a laptop. We looked at poverty. Marcus Rashford became the single greatest man in this country. Those things don't get abandoned as soon as we get out of this lockdown. Those things don't get abandoned. This job is because of the students. Never ever forget that. Keep that central to everything you do. And if you do that, this job will continue to give you pleasure. It is the best job in the world. Keep those students front and center of what we do, please, because they are the thing we have all missed most in this time. So that's my kind of leading point on this. Thank you so much for giving me this platform.
Thank you, Damon. Got goosebumps from the last bit. You're absolutely right, and it's. I think it's. You are the nonsense is, for want of a better phrase, is that the red tape, as it's so often referred to in lockdown. We didn't have a lot of that, and you know, I think one of my favourite parts was when they all entered. Sort of, I was on Google Classroom, and they'd all enter sort of one by one, and then it'd get close to the time more, and I'd be like morning, and then I'd name them morning, and they responded to that in chat because they've got the time, they feel confident to do so. And that reference, I think some of your colleagues actually talked about that reference to the quiet student and how that student felt when you said, you know, you were on fire during lockdown, absolutely nailed it. And that feedback is so important, isn't it? And you're right, the core of everything that we do is, you know, it's our students. So thank you. And just a few questions, conscious of time. Mm-hmm. Somebody said, in terms of your assessment for learning instead of data, I know that we're quite lucky in our school as well. You know, our head teacher is very sensible and has said there's absolutely no point having an assessment point for the sake of an assessment point. We're going to learn right up until 3 weeks before the end of the summer term, and only then do we measure progress since lockdown rather than holistic all year progress, because otherwise we're, you know, alienating those students. So how would you advise assessment for learning instead of data?
I think it's about, you know, recognizing that we need assessment of the students' progress, understanding, etc. But it's about what they're writing, what they're putting together, what they're completing, rather than just let's get the grade, let's get it on the system, let's feed back lessons. It's going, right, I'm doing an assessment, but why am I doing the assessment? It's questioning the value of the thing you've put in front of them. I'm not suggesting we get rid of the concept of assessment. I'm not suggesting replace it with quick hands up or hands down or anything like that. I'm saying let's, you know, assess our students, but let's ask them questions that are valuable. You know, so rather than doing, for example, with English, you know, examine the presentation of this character in this scene, go, right, you know, did you enjoy this book? Yes or no? And the assessment is them going, I love this book because here's why, or I didn't like this book, here's why. But it's not about grading it. It's about looking at what they've got to say, interacting with what, you know, what they produce, and going, right, you've said something here, that's incredibly valuable. That's what I mean when I say assessment for the sake of the learning rather than assessment for the sake of data. Hopefully
yeah, I think I spoke about it in my last CPD session last week, actually. I think you're absolutely right. I think we've got to ask, and Dylan Williams says validity. Is your assessment valid? Does it have a purpose? And that's really important. And hopefully, if my experience is anything to go down, by the last 3 schools I've worked in, we are moving away from that data drop every half term for the sake of data drop. And we are, you know, using formative assessment much more regularly, well, every day. And then summative assessment just informs us of, you know, where are they in terms of linking to those gaps from formative assessment, and how can we move forward with that? It's not just for a spreadsheet to show an external agency anymore. So fingers crossed it stays that way and we move forward a bit further. And just one last question then. Rachel said, what are your thoughts on implementing all of this excellent advice whilst also then navigating those hurdles of, you know, not crossing the hazard tape, not stepping over the 2-metre distance, because we can't use the room as much as we previously could? And she just welcomed your thoughts on that.
I think a lot of what I do is front and centre. So I am the front of the classroom, I'm in charge of the classroom. I think the most important thing you can do if you don't own one already is buy a visualizer, because what that allows you to do is it makes the modelling so much simpler and so much less time consuming before the lesson, because you can literally just live model. If you can create a situation where, you know, you step back, you put the book in front under the visualizer, you can show the whole class and you can, like, not mark it, but you can observe the points that are successful and unsuccessful. I think, you know, now that the room is cut down in size a little bit, we're listening more to students' verbal responses, which is why I talked about modelling oracy. And we're also looking at that, you know, how can we quickly give that feedback or quickly engage in that material? The visualizer is such a useful way to do that. You know, I came to my school 6 years ago with a visualizer in my hand and a pocket full of dreams. And have since, you know, they're in every single classroom now in our school. Like, we would not have been able to do the remote learning without the visualizer.
The thing I spent on my budget was a visualizer for every single class teacher. And I've left my visualizer at home all week this week. And I've just been like floundering, like desperate, like, can you lend me your visualizer? Let me visualizer. So yeah, I agree, especially in this era, shall we call it? Yeah. Thank you so much, Lindy. That was beautiful. And I will, with your permission, share those resources that you've shared. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, no problem.
Thank you. And now I'm going to, did I just call you Andy? I didn't I? Yeah, sorry, Damon. It's Andy next. I'm now going to introduce Andy, whose blogs have saved me eons of time, especially over the last year, and whose work with Microsoft OneNote has fascinated me, because I bought myself an iPad Pro at the start of this year with the intention of using it as a notebook, and now it's very much a YouTube machine for my 3-year-old. So I need to get that back, reclaim it, give her a kid's Kindle back and say that's for mummy's work. So I've got an Apple pen sitting down here somewhere worth £100, which I've not used. So Andy is an English teacher, and for 5 years before that he taught at undergraduate level. So we are in the presence of academics. Now, in addition to teaching, he's also responsible for whole school research and academic enrichment. And he's going to talk to us today about using Class Notebook beyond lockdown. And the irony is here that I'm using a pen and paper to write notes on this session. And what I should be doing is using my iPad. And maybe I'll do that for the next one that you do, Andy. So thanks so much. Take it away, Andy.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to assume that everyone can see OneNote. I thought what better way to kind of talk about OneNote than actually deliver my presentation through it. So yeah, super excited to be talking to you all this evening. When lockdown first started, this latest lockdown, I put out a couple of posts about Class Notebook, and I think that kind of garnered a bit of a reputation, amongst some at least, as a kind of tech whiz but I can definitely guarantee that's not the case, and that's not just false modesty. It really isn't. I was in a fortunate position actually that my school had been using Class Notebook and Teams for a couple of years now. So when we entered that second lockdown, I actually had a couple of years use of OneNote Class Notebook under my belt, which would account for my seeming ability to use it effectively. But this is interesting for another reason. Really what I want to talk about today is it's given me a bit of a sense, a bit of an insight as to how to use Class Notebook outside of lockdown. Because actually for the last couple of years, it's been a big part of my routine teaching, and it wasn't just for me a kind of response to the situation we found ourselves in. So what I've actually done for today's presentation is I've created a replica of a Class Notebook from a couple of years ago, so before lockdown. And I just wanted to talk you through how I used it. So it's pretty much an exact replica. I've kind of missed a couple of things out, but it's more or less the same that I had with an actual class, GCSE class, a couple of years ago. And so how I kind of used it as part of my routine teaching, and how when lockdown ends completely and we kind of go back to what we know and love in the classroom, I'll continue to use it pretty much in this same way as well. And I suppose if I were to kind of condense this approach down, it would be what you can see on the screen now. I'm still a massive fan of booklets. I use them for pretty much everything I teach. I'm a massive fan of the visualizer as well. And in the classroom itself, pretty much all the work that my students do are going to be done via a booklet, via me with my visualizer, and then an exercise book. But what Class Notebook does, for me at least, is it's a way in which to centralize and store the various resources that we might have been using in lessons. So it's definitely not replacing for me a kind of booklet, exercise book, visualizer, but it is adding to that as part of the kind of routine business that we're doing. So without further ado, let me show you what it looks like. And as I say, this is pretty much an exact replica of a couple of years ago. So the content library is where I store all of the kinds of things that I would want the students to have access to. So of course the students have access to all of this whenever they would like. So this is where I would store all of the various materials that I want them to have access to. And I tend to divide it into text, which I find the kind of most logical way of organizing the actual different sections of the content library. So if I just take you through each of them, just to give you a flavor of what's in there. So this is the All tab, and this is called All because it's stuff that's relevant to multiple texts, so it's not kind of text specific. So I have a knowledge organizer for paper 1 and paper 2 of lit, and then paper 1 and paper 2 of language. I've actually probably moved away a little bit from the knowledge organizer, just as a general point. But as I say, this is pretty much an exact replica of a couple of years ago, at which point I was using them quite often. So that's something that the students can go back to and look at and revisit. And it might be kind of part of our homework routines anyway. And when I introduced what, how, why, which is a big part of kind of how I teach them, I'm really big fan of what, how, why. I did it through OneNote, and again they can have access to this afterwards. So if I set them a homework to do something on what, how, why, I knew that they had access to this to help them to do that. And we also have things like this in the kind of all section. Now, because we're doing the work in the classroom with an exercise book or with a booklet, I would still print these out. They would still have a kind of printed copy of this. But again, this is a place in which I can store it. So if anyone loses a copy, everyone knows exactly where to find it. And then the same with this sheet here. Again, it's something I would print out and use in class. They'd have a copy of it, but it's still something that they can refer back to. And again, the same as that as well. I also have a section on revision tips. So when they're kind of out on their own, revising, hopefully, possibly, they can come back to this, and this is going to give them some practical strategies. And again, we'll go through this in class, so I'm not telling them to just go away and read it and kind of do it themselves. Like, we'll go through this, I'll model some of these ideas, but again, it's a central hub in which they can refer back to it and use it. So if we move on to the text specific stuff, so the kind of things that I would place in this is, first of all, kind of retrieval forms. Iteracy, by the way, is the name I give to retrieval practice, if you were wondering. So for instance, they would have a Microsoft form that's a review of each of the key scenes. So this is something they can do as many times as they want. And you can see it's embedded into the notebook itself. So they can go away, do that, or I can set it as a homework, and again, they can access it and they can do it really easily. And then we also have various mind maps that I would have gone through in class. And again, this is just a place in which to store those. So we would have done this together on paper, but it's a place in which to kind of store that for future reference. And same with things like the essay structure. And then the booklet itself. So here's the booklet that I would use, but I upload a full PDF copy of it so that they can gain access to it. But then what I also do, which I think is a really good benefit of using OneNote as part of kind of normal routine of teaching, is once we've finished our study of Macbeth, what I can then do is I can take a photograph and upload a fully annotated copy. So this is the copy that we would have annotated as a group in class. They have a physical booklet, so they should have these notes and annotations anyway. They're a kind of product of our discussion. But if anyone wanted to have a look at a particular moment in it, if they wanted to revisit something and they were a little unsure about the kinds of things we discussed in class, or they want to kind of prompt or cue the kind of thinking of a particular bit, then again, they've got access to all of these annotations. And one of the good things, for me at least, about OneNote is, otherwise, where would these annotations go? And again, the students have a copy, so I'm perhaps not too worried about it. But all of the annotations that I made along with them, they would just be kept with me. So by doing it this way, it has a central location where they can go back to it and access it. And I won't go through every single section because actually it's much the same. So again, my maps are the history boys. We have a kind of full text if they want to access it. And again, perhaps the most kind of useful feature of using OneNote outside of remote learning, we have the actual annotated text for them to be able to refer back to or look at. And again, there's various other things. So with the poetry anthology, we've again got the different, well, some of the forms at least, and then the kind of official anthology, the kind of booklet that I use for teaching this particular part of the course that they can get access to. I hadn't actually uploaded a kind of photograph copy, and I wanted this to be as authentic as possible, so I didn't actually include it here. And much the same for kind of the rest of them. But one particular feature that I think perhaps in many ways is one of the really, really effective parts of using OneNote outside of the kind of normal routine is how it can help us to effectively model and do modeling. So I tend to call modeling reverse engineering. That's the kind of, like iteracy, and it's the kind of name that I call it. And mostly that's because I want to kind of frame modeling as about thinking, deconstructing, working backwards, looking at exactly what's making it effective. So I used a kind of term reverse engineering. But one of the really, really good things, perhaps actually the most useful thing about using OneNote outside of lockdown, is this section right here. Because what it allows me to do is whenever I model something under the visualizer, something I try and do a lot, it actually gives me a place to store that. So I have an exercise book, as I'm sure a lot of people do, for each class, and if I'm modeling something under the visualizer, I'll kind of do it in that exercise book. But again, before I started to use OneNote as a kind of routine part of teaching, that exercise book and all the modeling and material within it, it wouldn't really go anywhere. It wouldn't necessarily have use beyond the moment of doing it, which is of course incredibly useful anyway. So this became a way in which to centralize and provide all of those materials. And equally, if a student had produced something really, really good, then I would put it here as well. So this reverse engineering section is probably, I would say, the most effective benefit of using OneNote just outside of lockdown. So I also have a section for storing all of my whole class feedback, and I didn't actually include any of the particular kind of ones because I didn't want to include any student names, but this is where I would put all the whole class feedback, and if you could imagine, it would just be dated all the way down there. And then here we can see, for instance, some of the models that I've done. So this particular one that you're seeing now is something that I did in lesson as a kind of live modeled response to an unseen poetry. And I did it in the exercise book, but then I've put it here afterwards so that perhaps in a future lesson we can return to it, or we can use it, or if I set a homework for the students, they can then use this in order to kind of help them to do that. And again, much the same with some of the others. So this is something that we did in class, where we looked at a particular model response and we talked about it and deconstructed it, and had a really good think about what it was doing effectively. But then all of that work that we did, you know, incredibly beneficial in and of itself, is then stored in OneNote as a kind of future point of contact. And the other thing I use it for is any of the past questions. So practice questions that I might want them to do, or they might want to do in their own time. It's all kind of stored here. So there's again a central point of contact for them to refer back to and look at, and it's centralizing all of that materials that otherwise might get lost or damaged or become kind of disparately spread across different sources. So here's Macbeth, and you can see again some of the questions that I would have sent them, and again various model responses as well. And there's an example of a student one that I took a picture of, and here's something that I did in, not that one actually, yeah, here's something that I did in lesson. And again, this is the kind of thing that I would just do as kind of routine part of teaching, like some, in this case, live modeling of what, how, why for the history boys. But again, by using OneNote in this way, it gives me a place in which to store it so that we can return to it, revisit it, or use it after the moment in which it's been created. And then same with the language as well, I kind of collate it by questions. So we have, for instance, a model response for question 2, question 3 rather, and then various ones for question 2. And these might be ones that I've done, either live in the moment or as a kind of pre-written one, or it might be ones that students have done that we just put here so everyone knows where to access it. The other really good benefit of using OneNote in this way is you can obviously create, just like it would do normally, a section for each of the students. And again, because I've just made this as a replica, I've not actually included real examples, but what I tend to include in each of those kind of student segments is a section for them to upload homework. So if I was wanting them to do homework kind of typed as opposed to in their exercise book, which admittedly isn't very often, or if it's a kind of homework that might not be necessarily suited to being done in an exercise book, there's a central place in which I can store it and I can access it and I can look at it, which is really useful. There's also opportunities for them to do further research ideas, make notes in class if that's applicable, which admittedly it kind of often isn't because we're doing everything with exercise books and booklets as well. And any notes that they take in class that they would like to digitize, again, just by taking a photo of it and kind of put up there. So I think reflecting on this kind of moment of lockdown, I've been using OneNote in a few ways that I perhaps won't continue to do so. I am very much looking forward to going back to everyone being in the class. Everyone has an exercise book, a booklet, me with my visualizer. So there's certain ways in which I've used OneNote as a response to lockdown that I'm probably not going to continue. But I think the kind of template or the replica that I've just taken you through is how I've been using it before lockdown. It's how I imagine I'll continue to use it after lockdown, and it will just continue to kind of augment the kinds of stuff that we're doing in the classroom with the visualizer, the booklet, and exercise book. And so there you go, that's me done, a kind of whistle-stop tour of how I've used OneNote in the past and how I'll continue to use it, and of course very, very happy to take any questions.
Can I send you my iPad and you do it all for me? Is that?
I'm sure we can arrange something.
There's a member of my team on at the moment who is an absolute whiz with Google Classroom, and she's probably thinking, yeah, Kaylee could really do with that, to be honest. So yeah, I have got a few questions. Thank you. That's blown my mind. Like, I never knew you could use, didn't even know you could put documents into OneNote. I just thought it was like a writing pad, but there we go. Technologically disadvantaged is how I will term myself. So somebody wants to know how you share these folders with students, and that was a similar question to me as well. We have got Microsoft Word, etc., and I can have OneNote on my computer, but we use Google Classroom as our online learning platform. Is it easily transferable across platforms?
So you would need a kind of Teams kind of login. So if you're a kind of like purely Google Classroom school, you can still do it because it's completely free service. But realistically, it probably isn't going to kind of sync very well with the kinds of tech that you're using. So if you're a kind of full Google Classroom, you can do it just for your own private use with you and your class. But it's probably not going to sit very well with the kind of wider infrastructure you have. In terms of sharing it with students, that's really easy actually. So you'd upload things into, say, the content library, and once you've added all of your students to it, there's a tab at the top called Class Notebook, and if you go into that tab, you can then distribute, it's called, you can distribute a page and it'll automatically be sent to every single student in that class notebook. So that takes like 5 seconds. It's really, really quick.
Okay, that's reassuring. And somebody else asked, that particular booklet you just shared with us, how long did it take you to put that together in real time?
Oh, the Macbeth one.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? The power of Twitter. It was actually loads of kind of materials by Doug Wise, loads of materials by Stuart Pike. So in terms of me kind of creating that particular booklet, I was very much standing on the shoulders of their hard work. So I kind of tweaked it a little bit, changed it for context, added a few stuff in that I liked, but actually it was very much a kind of fruits of their labour, not mine.
Well, we're all one team, aren't we? So we're all here to help each other. So thank you so much.
Absolutely true.
Really appreciate that. I think you should open a business where you get people to post their tablets or their iPads and you just do that for them. I would pay, have my iPad do what you need to.
That sounds a lucrative idea.
It does. You should take it to Dragon's Den. I'm in. Okay, thank you so much, Holly. I am conscious of time. We are running somewhat over, but we have the wonderful Holly Wimbush, last but not least at all. I'm very lucky to say that Holly is one of my friends and somebody that I go to again for ITT advice. I've been a mentor, but I've not really delved into the depths of ITT. So Holly is one of my go-tos as well as Jade. So Holly is a teacher of 7 years and she leads on Key Stage 4 and 5 literature in her department. She's also worked for and this is very ambiguous, a world-renowned publisher, and now she works in a comprehensive school in Cheshire, where she is also ITT and NQT mentor. She's recently published an article which can be found in Teaching English Language and Literature 16 to 18 for NATE, which is marvellous, by the way. And she is a firm believer in research-led and evidence-based practice, as I think all of us are who are on here. So we will be nodding along with vigour, I'm sure. Okay, thank you so much, Holly. You want to take it away?
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Good evening, guys. Thank you for staying to the very end to listen to little old me. So I'm going to be talking about ITT mentoring and obviously transitioning back into a classroom environment. If you want to find me, I am at H Wimbush English. Okay, so a little context about me, although Kaylee has obviously gone through a little bit. I've been a SCITS mentor for 5 years. I've also been teaching for 7 years. I've recently become a NQT mentor in the last year. And I've currently worked with a number of different providers, whether it is our actual teaching schools, so our SCIPS, whether it's PGCE or Teach First, which happened last year. So I've worked with a load of different people over the time that I've been teaching. So this year, I have had 4 trainees. I had 2 in placement A, and I've got 2 currently. And I just want to let everyone know that to be an ITT mentor, to be an NQT mentor, is just an absolute gift that keeps on giving. You're at the forefront of watching people develop, of changing, of transitioning from novice to somewhat of an expert, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing to be a part of. And also I learn an awful lot as well alongside my wonderful, wonderful trainees. So placement 8 for us was September to February. And what we saw during this time period was a lot of in-class teaching, where we had the full expectations of a trainee. So that means lesson observation, reviews, meetings, and obviously if well, the 50% time, was it 50%? Some sort of a timetable, obviously. And then we moved to blended teaching, purely based on the fact that we had a number of our cohorts in trainee teachers who were shielding. We also had a number of our students off as well, as I'm sure that all you guys did as well. And then obviously between January to February, we moved fully to remote teaching. But yes, again, we had the full expectations of the trainee whilst this particular part of our placement was continuing. So what we've done between December and February, we actually had Ofsted are currently doing a lot of research into this alongside the Department of Education. And I was lucky enough to take part into that research, and we were quizzed about the kind of plus sides of COVID teaching in a remote situation, and also the downside. So I'd love to share them with you right now. So the positives were that we kind of gave them a step back on providing lesson plans. We gave them an opportunity to just do a beginning, middle and end plan or a couple of notes. We also just focused on the PowerPoint, so what would be delivered. We followed the whole school policy of, well, our school policy was the Key Stage 3, we only taught or spoke to them for 10 minutes remotely, and then they would have individual tasks and independent tasks to go and complete. And Key Stage 4 was 15 to 20 minutes at the start, and again, independent tasks. And the trainees followed this to the letter, which was absolutely brilliant. We also saw them flourishing online with the use of technology. In fact, if it wasn't for a couple of my trainees, I would never have attempted a Jamboard. Didn't like it, stuck with Google Docs and how we were able to develop and change and edit things at the same time. So we learned off each other, which is brilliant. We also maintained meetings, so we could do snap meetings in the middle of day, which was really good, just well-being checks and stuff like that. Still clear monitoring of work. We continued with observations, but again, there was only one particular focus for this. And we had sandwich forms, which sounds really, really interesting and edible. Not so much. It was a what went well EDI and a what went well, okay? We still continue doing formative assessment and questioning. Questioning was really, really good for the trainees, even though we were talking to a black screen, just like I'm currently doing right now. We continue developing pedagogy and subject knowledge. So we had subject knowledge conversations in our meetings, so that continued. And we still have this kind of purposeful integration where all stakeholders, so whether you were head of skit, whether you were the subject mentor for the whole entire kind of trainees, or whether you were the actual internal ITT mentors and stuff, we all were communicating, all had meetings, we all mirrored our provision as a result of that. So the negatives, obviously something that we need to work on, and we'll see where this goes. Behaviour management and obviously getting back into the classroom, that is something that we really, really needed to focus with our particular trainees. The idea of differentiation or scaffolding, as I really, really want to focus on for my trainees, that's something that they are developing towards there. And obviously when we reduce our tasks down to 10 minutes to 15 minutes online kind of meeting versus the independent tasks, the idea of developing a really clear plan for a whole entire lesson, trainees struggled with. I struggled with it, but these trainees have not been in a classroom since December. And if you consider the amount of time that a trainee would normally spend in a classroom, that is a significant percentage of their particular placement. Another thing that obviously we need to focus on going forward is their formative and their summative assessments. Okay, so formative was developing And now it's something that I've now tried to get my trainees to focus more on, to see what obviously the students have remembered, as well as kind of picking up the questioning, the retrieval, and stuff like that. Another thing, again, we focused on, so the kind of wobbly situation for us was the idea of well-being. Now, I speak for myself, and I probably speak for a lot of people as well, in the fact that well-being during lockdown 3 was particularly kind of wobbly, in the fact that we were probably working longer hours. I know for the fact that I didn't know when to turn off my computer, so I just kept working on that, and that became a massive issue because I saw that this was also happening with my 2 trainees. I was getting emails at like midnight, I was getting text messages, all these kind of panicky things, and we just had to reduce an awful lot of kind of workload for them by just developing them as a person and looking at their kind of human side, obviously, before we looked at the professional. So well-being was a massive issue that we brought up with Ofsted and their research as well. Also, their idea of professional conduct, so that goes hand in hand a little bit with their well-being, in the fact that we are talking about knowing when to stop, okay, knowing when to email, when to kind of all those parameters that you would normally set within a particular routine of being in school, okay. And also the fact that we weren't able to do parent-see things. We did it virtually on camera right now, but because our particular provider wasn't able to kind of have like 2 cameras on at the same time from our side to the parent, a lot of our trainees were unable to do a parent-see thing as a result. And of course, because of our bubbles, we weren't able to do an awful lot of observation of others outside the faculty. So those are a few things that they needed to work on going forward. So when we looked at placement B, we continued with this. Our head of SCIT made the decision to continue with our placements. A lot of people that I'm aware of continued their placement A up until Easter. But we went ahead and made sure that we started placement B in February. Now, what we did, we went through a process, and I really actually enjoyed this particular process purely because we did something called, well, we did handover. You don't normally get that opportunity. You only get to go and observe your new trainee. And with the handover, it was really interesting because I ended up having Google Meets with the mentor at the time and the trainee, and we discussed easing the transition. We discussed action plans. So what can I do as a mentor to help you become better? Because obviously we all want to become better. And I've got a lovely quotation of Dylan William just sitting around in my head that obviously we do, which is exactly what Jade said earlier as well. And again, we really focused on that trainee well-being, that situation that we really wanted to not only kind of develop the professional, but also support the human. You don't, you've got at the time, you've got loads of kids that might be at your, in your house, obviously because you're, mums and dads, or you might be alone. So it depends on those kind of aspects, but we've really focused on the development of a supportive network. So I made myself available quite early on in January, actually, to speak to the new trainees just to ease that transition. And like I said, that action plan was really key for us, in the fact that we used our reviews that we would normally do, and we just picked out certain aspects that we really wanted to hone in on once placement B started. So those things really helped. So what we're going to focus on moving forward, and luckily enough, I've started to implement some of these suggestions. So we're still moving. So basically, we came back in the 3rd week of this particular half term, and I really fought with the head of SCIT to make sure that we had some in-class observations. For the first 2 weeks of our placement B, we had virtual and remote observations. So I really wanted to get the trainees in class to see how we do behaviour management and assessment and retrieval and all of these things that they would have missed out on for the last 3 months. So we've made sure that that happens. We also want to kind of keep an eye on trainee reluctance and trainee anxiety to get back into the classroom. I know my trainees won't mind me saying, but one of my new trainees, it was so ready for it that they wanted to go straight in, start teaching immediately, whereas another of my trainees was fairly reluctant, and luckily enough we're now kind of doing a timetable that is gradual, so again I can support their well-being and manage their anxiety that they might potentially have. We also need to address the issues of planning and also elements of sequential planning. You know, we don't normally assume that we're going to have these trainees that are going to be massively able to sequence lessons, schemes of work, long-term schemes. You know, that's not the case. We know for a fact that that is something that comes gradually. So with this sense of sequential planning, what I ultimately mean here is, what is the end point of your lesson today? What is the end point of your lessons this week? What is your end point for the end of the month? How is it all going to build? So that's what we tend to have a discussion of. And again, once the trainee can also tell me that, then obviously they are planned in a successful manner. We also need to work on establishing their presence. Now, again, that particular trainee who's really into it and wants to get going is able to establish their presence quite quickly, whereas ones that might be reluctant, that might be anxious, would need more encouragement. And obviously you need to understand and have some sort of emotional intelligence to kind of get to grips with that particular trainee and kind of give them the encouragement that they ultimately need. You also need to be able to re-establish your classroom routines. So again, that would be perfect in your in-class observations, because you would model your particular routine that you have, and then obviously kind of section it all up and kind of talk about the processes that you've got in place, but obviously the trainee can also do as a result. You also, they also needed to kind of focus on building genuine relationships with students and colleagues. You know, we've had 2 weeks of virtual or remote teaching where they've observed and just been a little kind of a little initial, if you will, if they've not had their camera on. So now it's really important to make sure that the face-to-face is also there as well. They need to find their pace, and also modeling live in a classroom is something that, again, is something really important for them. And also directing trainees towards other experienced members of staff. Okay, I really value observations and seeing things outside the classroom that you are currently in, because you are not an insular teacher. I mean, the people that are here tonight, you're here to learn off others and to listen to others, and also develop you as a person and share your ideas with everybody else. We are not insular people. So for a trainee to be insular, we need to make sure that we break those boundaries and make sure that they go and share their experiences by also seeing other colleagues that also might demonstrate different methods of delivery, different methods of behaviour management, different methods of planning, just so that they can find their own way in their own world and fit in how they would like to. And it's also about obviously retaining teachers. You know, that's also crucial in here, that we don't want to scare them off. We want to give them the structure and the support that they need. Okay. And as I've already said earlier, you know, getting trainees involved in subject-based CPD. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about subject knowledge development. Okay. And I've just started introducing learning walks within the faculty, because what we're able to do at the time is we have year group bubbles, so we can actually go in and out of classrooms. At the time, our years are kind of just following a normal timetable, so there's no sectioning away of that. And the trainees are really finding this enjoyable, that they just spend one free session just bobbing in and bobbing out, because all our doors are open anyway because of ventilation and COVID. So there you go. Good thing about having good ventilation, isn't it? So finally, some mentoring tips from me that I kind of do in my practice. as I've already said, I try to recognise that the trainees are novice teachers. I don't actually ever refer to them as trainees. I tend to refer to them as associate teachers. I value them as colleagues, you know, and what I tend to do is I really ground that content in coaching, and I try and support them in a cumulative, generative manner. I've already said this idea of emotional intelligence, you know, viewing the humans first and the professional second, and that comes from the absolute goddess that is Mary May out there. What I tend to do is I tend to have my subject mentor meetings as seminar style. So we have weekly mentor meetings where they would have a form to fill in that's all about the impact of progress, the impact on teaching, the impact of training that they've had on the Friday that they come and discuss the next week. So what I try and get them to do is I get them to fill in that particular report, that meeting before they come. And then we also have some sort of discussion, not just following bullet points of me talking, but more of a shared kind of development session that isn't just I'm the expert, because, you know, we're all somebody that wants to do better. So I'm not overly expert at everything. So I like to have discussions, and it's really valuable that way. I also provide clear deadlines for before the reviews are due. So we have 6 reviews over the year. So what I tend to do before the review is completely due, the week before I get them to do that, to complete it, and then I share it with, or they share it with me, and we talk it through in our seminar style subject mentor meetings. I also monitor the pedagogy calendar, and this is what I was talking about, that we're all stakeholders, so we all need to monitor the same process. So a couple of weeks ago, our trainees were having a look at Key Stage 5 curriculums and how to deliver Key Stage 5 lessons. So what I tended to do is I made sure that particular week my trainees were able to observe Key Stage 5 lessons. Earlier on in the year, they were talking about planning, and they were talking about assessment methods, and I introduced them to retrieval practice. And as a result of that, I've now seen retrieval practice in the majority of their lessons, which is absolutely brilliant. So I complement and I supplement the pedagogy calendar with something that's really kind of inherently focused around our English provision, as well as things that I think are really, really important for them. I've already said that. In fact, what we've had with this, I've had on Tuesdays, I run teach meets at my school where we do subject knowledge development. It's 10 minutes, it's only a little session, and the trainees have come to that as well, and I video them for anybody that can't make it so that they can watch it as well. I always make sure that there is a strict deadline. I tell my trainees, and they hate me, bless them, that they have a 48-hour turnaround. So if they are teaching something on, well, tomorrow, for example, they needed to have given it me on Monday so that I can read through it and give them direct feedback so that they can obviously improve, take on advice, and obviously change and adapt as appropriately as they possibly can. But ultimately, we need to allow the trainees to observe practice from outside the faculty or other outstanding practitioners in certain pedagogical fields of expertise. And that is something that I really pride our school on, is the fact that I know exactly who to send my trainees to in order to observe different practice that obviously is different to me. So those are my mentoring top tips, or not really top tips, but some tips that you might want to look at. And then I've also included some really, really interesting reading as well, stuff about from obviously the Department of Education, but also Ofsted. And I know for a fact that the new Ofsted research will be coming out later this year, which we, my skit, took part in. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Wowzers. Can you be my mentor, please? I'd really like it if you could just could I just go back to being an NQT so I can have you as a mentor? Lindsay's on here and she was my mentor, so that might be offensive. Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much. So a few questions for you, so bear with me.
Hang on, let me get the chat up. I can see too. Oh gosh.
There aren't any questions. So a question that I had was, in terms of that idea of that 48-hour turnaround.
Yes.
How do you do that so that it doesn't come across as too didactic, dictatorial, if you will? Because I know that if somebody said to me, right, you've got 48 hours to give me this, I might be like, whoa, hold on a minute, because I don't like being told what to do. So how is it down to relationship? Is it down to clarity from the start, a bit like what Jade was saying?
Yeah, I think being completely transparent in the process. What I've tended to do, depending on the training, in placement A, I just say it like, oh, you know, it'd be a really good idea if you could just send it 48 hours in advance so I can give you the feedback that you deserve, the value that also you want to have as well. So they see it as something that is a supportive measure. Depending on the placement B trainee, you know, depends on the reviews that they've had previous to that. You don't particularly know how that trainee works. You don't know what their family life's like. You have no idea about that until you obviously get to know them. So with my placement Bs, I've just kind of, again, just used it really kind of supportively. Like, if you want to get really clear feedback, it would be a really good idea if you could just send it 48 hours in advance, because then you get everything that you would deserve with that. And again, it's the same kind of process. Now, I've said in the past, and I'll be completely honest, I said to one trainee a few years ago, who seemed quite laid back, let's put it, and everything. Yeah, very laid back. And I said, and it was a placement B trainee, and I said that I was aware that there were certain issues previously. I want it 48 hours in advance, because I will not let you teach unless I've seen what you have created. And luckily enough, that person, excuse my northernism, if you will, pulled his socks right up, and it was absolutely brilliant. And you could see the planning develop, because that person knew that I was checking everything. So it's different processes. It's knowing your training.
It's not, and it's not dissimilar to students, is it? You know that there's one student in the classroom that if you say, if you don't do this homework X, Y, and Z, they're going to get the backup. Whereas there's one student that's going to be like, yeah, I really need to, and never ever excuse yourself for your northernness, by the way. Yeah, I really need to pull my socks off, need to sort it out. So yeah, I love that. Somebody has asked though, when you do that 48-hour process, what is the process in terms of your feedback? How do you give that feedback? How do you support them in planning their lessons?
So when it comes to feedback, what I tend to do is give them some kind of points or pointers. I don't necessarily give them like tons of things to do. I might make a few suggestions. I'll ask a load of questions like, so you planned this particular element. What do you want the students to learn from that? What is the end product? Or have you thought this through? There's the wording, the phrasing needs to be looked at. And then what I'll do is, if it's via email, which is so impersonal, but what I've suggested in the past, I've just put at the very end of the email is like, if you want to talk this through face to face, I'm more than happy to do this, and we can plan it together if you need that. So yeah, that's how I tend to work it.
Marvelous. Right, thank you so much. We've only actually ran 5 minutes over time, which I'm quite impressed with. Lots of speakers, lots of people have left because they've had to do bedtime. It's not a reflection on whoever was speaking. Lots of people said it's been so useful, they're looking forward to coming back. So a lot of the speakers aren't here because they're also doing bedtime. But thank you for those of you that did stick around right until the end. Apologies for the interruption. I have reported said person to that person is somebody that engages with me on Twitter and pretends to be an English language expert. So that's worrying, isn't it? Really worrying. I've been catfished for sure. I will put all of the resources available on the website in the coming few days. Damon and Holly, you're the only ones left that have spoken. Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed that. Thank you all for coming. If you've got any more queries or questions, feel free to get in touch with me or with any of the speakers, and we will do our best to respond to you. Thanks, guys. See you later. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.